Hello everyone. Who was Mansa Musa, the richest man in history, and what would his net worth be now? Today's billionaires don't come close to the Mali Empire's late ruler, who had incomprehensible wealth, the Golden King. During the early 14th century, King Mansa Musa I reigned over Mali and amassed enormous wealth that remains jaw-dropping to this day. Imagine how much money the richest person in history would have. Now add a couple $100 billion, and you've probably gotten closer to how much wealth Mansa Musa had during the 14th century. Contemporary accounts of Musa's wealth are so breathless that it's almost impossible to get a sense of just how wealthy and powerful he truly was. Rodolphe Bouchware, associate professor of history at the University of California, told the BBC. As the king of the Mali Empire in West Africa, Musa first came to power in 1312. At that point, the kingdom was already prosperous. But under the rule of Musa, Mali became even more wealthy. Taking advantage of the region's natural resources, like gold and salt, Musa expanded his empire throughout several territories and made a big impression along the way. Economists have determined that the West African emperor's vast fortune most likely positions him as the richest person in history. But just how much money did he have? And what did he do with it? In Mandinka, Mansa means sultan or emperor. It was recorded that Musa Keita was born around 1280 AD during the Keita dynasty, per BBC. He was born into a family of rulers and came into power in 1312 AD when his brother Mansa Abu Bakr abdicated the throne to go on an extravagant expedition at sea. According to historian Shibab al-Umari, Abu Bakr had always been fascinated with the Atlantic Ocean and reportedly left with a fleet of about 2,000 ships with thousands of men, women, and slaves, but he never returned. Mansa Musa became the ninth sultan of the West African Kingdom, which was already considered very wealthy by the time he ascended. Under his rule, the Kingdom of Mali grew significantly. He annexed 24 cities, including Timbuktu. The kingdom stretched for about 2,000 miles, from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to modern-day Niger, taking in parts of what are now Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, the Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, and Ivory Coast. With such a large land mass came great resources such as gold and salt. During the reign of Mansa Musa, the Empire of Mali accounted for almost half of the Old World's gold, according to the British Museum. And all of it belonged to the king. But despite his massive success, Musa was not very well known beyond the region he ruled, until he journeyed outside of Africa. A devout Muslim, Musa was determined to make his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. And with that, the rest of the world would soon know his name. He would have to travel 4,000 miles from his empire to get there. As a rich and powerful emperor, he certainly could not go alone. Musa embarked on his pilgrimage accompanied by a total of 60,000 people, a mix of servants, soldiers, and supporters. Musa's servants weren't dressed in rags as one might expect. Instead, they were wrapped in Persian silks and carried gold staffs. The world quickly began to take notice of Musa's convoy of people, horses, and camels. The camels, about 100 of them, meanwhile, carried bags of pure gold. It was a city moving through the desert. Not only was Musa's caravan impossible to miss, but he was also buying as many goods as he could find, and giving away gold to random peasants on the street. As Musa passed through Cairo, Medina, and finally to Mecca, he left the streets basically littered with gold. Mansa Musa left such a memorable impression on Cairo that al-Umari, who visited the city 12 years after the Malian king, recounted how highly the people of Cairo were speaking of him. So lavishly did he hand out gold in Cairo that his 3-month stay caused the price of gold to plummet in the region for 10 years, wrecking the economy. US-based technology company SmartAsset.com estimates that due to the depreciation of gold, Mansa Musa's pilgrimage led to about $1.05 ben, £1 1 ben, of economic losses across the Middle East. On his way back home, Mansa Musa passed through Egypt again, and according to some, tried to help the country's economy by removing some of the gold from circulation by borrowing it back at extortionate interest rates from Egyptian lenders. Others say he spent so much that he ran out of gold. There's no question that Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca would help cement his place in history. But at the time, he simply saw it as a necessary journey to honor his faith and a way to expand his growing kingdom. During that historic trip, he acquired the territory of Gahan. There is no doubt that Mansa Musa spent or wasted a lot of gold during his pilgrimage, but it was this excessive generosity that also caught the eyes of the world. So what did Mansa Musa do with all the money, aside from giving away gold to random people on the street and using it to buy souvenirs? Ultimately, he used most of it to build a great number of mosques. Legend says he built one every Friday during his reign, the most famous of which is the Jinga River Mosque. He also commissioned several universities throughout the kingdom. Many of these historic buildings, both the schools and the mosques, are still standing today, some 700 years later. The rich king is often credited with starting the tradition of education in West Africa, although the story of his empire largely remains little known outside West Africa. While Mansa Musa was alive, his investment in Islamic education in Mali drew scores of Muslim scholars, poets, and artisans to his empire. They congregated in Timbuktu, which quickly became known as one of the most prominent cities in the Islamic world. Mansa Musa had put Mali and himself on the map, quite literally. In a Catalan Atlas map from 1375, a drawing of an African king sits on a golden throne atop Timbuktu, holding a piece of gold in his hand. Timbuktu became an African El Dorado, and people came from near and far to have a glimpse. This depiction of a wealthy king created something of a fantasy for people in Europe. At the time, many European countries were struggling through the bubonic plague, civil wars, and economic hardship. The image of a prosperous Timbuktu and massive amounts of gold wove an enchanting tapestry in the European imagination. Ultimately, Musa ruled the Mali Empire for about 20 years. During that time, he extended the reach of his trade ports significantly and became one of the most powerful rulers of his day, and perhaps of all time. After Mansa Musa died in 1337, aged 57, the empire was inherited by his sons who could not hold the empire together. The smaller states broke off and the empire crumbled. The later arrival of Europeans in the region was the final nail in the empire's coffin. The history of the medieval period is still largely seen only as a Western history, says Lisa Corin-Grazios, director of the Bloch Museum of Art, explaining why the story of Mansa Musa is not widely known. Had Europeans arrived in significant numbers in Musa's time, with Mali at the height of its military and economic power, instead of a couple hundred years later, things almost certainly would have been different, says Mr. Ware. In the spirit of other wealthy people who ultimately become philanthropists, you might wonder how Mansa Musa stacks up against some contemporary billionaires like Bernard Arnault, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, or John D. Rockefeller. When adjusted for inflation, Mansa Musa's net worth is believed to have been around $400 billion. The only American billionaire from modern history who even comes close to that amount is John D. Rockefeller, whom economists believe amassed a worth of around $336 billion. But today's billionaires don't even get close to Musa's wealth. The world's billionaires is an annual ranking of people who are considered to have a net worth of $1 billion or more by the American business magazine Forbes. The list was first published in March 1987. Warning: the total net worth of each individual on the list is estimated and is cited in United States dollars, based on their documented assets and accounting for debt and other factors. The rankings are published annually in March, so the net worths listed are snapshots taken at that time. These lists only show the top 10 wealthiest billionaires for each year. According to current data, as of May 2023, the richest person today is Bernard Arnault and his family with $211 billion, and Elon Musk is in second place with $180 billion. In other words, today's richest people don't even have half of Mansa Musa's net worth that he accumulated as emperor all those centuries ago. This has led many experts to believe that Musa was the richest person in history. But to this day, many still struggle to comprehend the true size of his fortune. Contemporary accounts of Musa's wealth are so breathless that it's almost impossible to get a sense of just how wealthy and powerful he truly was, said Rodolphe Bouchware, an associate professor of history at the University of California. In the end, historians find Mansa Musa's legacy rich not only because of how much money he had, but how he used it. And while his wealth may have been indescribable, he was clearly happy to share it with others.